Captain Dorian Vex was no stranger to danger. Once a Special Forces operative for the United Earth Defense, he now roamed the uncharted regions of space as an explorer. His ship, the Vanguard, was sleek and fast, built for missions that most people would never even dream of taking on. His most recent journey had brought him to an unknown planet in the far reaches of the galaxy, after he picked up a strange, one-time distress signal. No one had responded to it for years, but Dorian's curiosity had always led him to the unexplored, the mysterious, and the dangerous. As he set his ship down on the planet's surface, the air was thick and heavy, and the atmosphere crackled with an eerie quiet. There were no signs of intelligent life in the vicinity, but Dorian was not a man who relied solely on his instruments. He trusted his instincts that had kept him alive through countless battles. He stepped out of the Vanguard and into the alien world. His boots crunched softly against the soft, purple-tinted grass that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The sky above was an odd blend of deep orange and green, casting a strange glow over the landscape. Dorian scanned his surroundings, keeping an eye out for any signs of life. It was a strange place, but he couldn't help but feel the excitement of discovering something new. As he moved deeper into the wild terrain, he saw something that made him freeze in his tracks. Through the thick trees ahead, a figure moved swiftly between the trunks. Someone, or something, was watching him. The figure's movements were quick, graceful, and unlike anything Dorian had seen before. His hand instinctively went to the pulse rifle strapped to his back, but he hesitated. The figure was not attacking, but rather, it was fleeing from him. It wasn't common for life forms to avoid a human, especially when they weren't even sure what a human was. Dorian decided to follow, his curiosity outweighing caution. He followed the figure as it darted between the alien trees, always just a few steps ahead. His boots slipped on the slick moss beneath him, but he kept pace, staying careful not to make too much noise. The figure led him deep into a jungle-like thicket, and soon the sounds of wildlife filled the air. Strange bird-like creatures squawked in the distance, and the low hum of alien insects buzzed all around him. Just as he was about to lose sight of the figure, he stumbled into a clearing, and there she stood, frozen in place. The woman was tall, much taller than a human, and her skin shimmered with a soft, silver-blue hue. Her eyes, wide and filled with terror, locked onto his. Her hair was long and luminescent, a cascade of glowing strands that seemed to flicker with their own inner light. She was stunning, but it was the fear in her eyes that caught Dorian off guard. His heart raced as he watched her, trying to make sense of what was happening. The woman's mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, with trembling hands, she managed to speak in a language Dorian didn't recognize. Her words were high-pitched, full of emotion, and they carried a sense of urgency. She stepped back as if she were about to run again. But then her eyes widened even more, and she froze. The woman's expression shifted from fear to pure terror, as if she had seen a ghost. In that moment, Dorian realized something wasn't right. He had been on enough missions to sense when something was wrong, and everything about this encounter felt off. The woman didn't just fear him. She knew something about him. Her reaction wasn't just because he was a stranger. It was as if she had seen a nightmare come to life. Slowly, Dorian took a cautious step forward. The woman's breathing quickened, and her body tensed, ready to flee at the slightest movement. "Hey, it's okay," Dorian said in a calm, reassuring tone. But the woman's eyes only grew wider. Her lips parted, and she whispered something he could barely understand. "Harbinger. Destroyer." Dorian stood there, utterly confused by the alien woman's words. The air between them felt charged with tension, and despite the peaceful surroundings, a strange feeling of dread settled in his chest. She seemed so terrified of him, more than anyone he had ever encountered in his travels. Her eyes were wide with panic, and her entire body was trembling. Dorian had seen fear before, but this was something else. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was a deep, instinctive terror, like she had seen something in him that he hadn't even realized was there. Harbinger. Destroyer. The words echoed in his mind, but they made no sense. What did she mean by that? Was it some kind of insult, or was it something more? Dorian's mind raced, trying to piece together any meaning from the strange words. But before he could ask anything, the woman took a step back, almost tripping over the thick roots of the alien trees. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her hands were shaking as if she wanted to push him away but was too afraid to do so. Dorian took a cautious step forward, trying his best not to spook her further. "Hey, wait," he said gently, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you." He didn't know why he was trying to reassure her, especially considering that he had no idea who she was or why she was so frightened of him. But something in her fear felt familiar, like he had seen it before. She couldn't keep her eyes off him, as if he were some kind of monster, but Dorian couldn't understand why. He had no weapons drawn, no menacing gestures, nothing to make her think he was dangerous, other than his presence. Her eyes darted around nervously, and with a sudden burst of speed, she turned and bolted into the dense forest, leaving Dorian no time to react. He hesitated for a moment, then quickly followed her. His boots pounded against the soft ground, and he pushed through the thick undergrowth, barely keeping up with her. She was fast, and her movements were graceful, as if she knew this planet like the back of her hand. But despite her speed, Dorian wasn't about to let her slip away without answers. He chased her through the dense jungle, his heart racing. The sounds of the planet seemed to grow louder, the rustling of unseen creatures, the chirps of alien birds, the hum of insects, all blending into a chaotic chorus of noise. But through it all, he stayed focused on her, never losing sight of her glowing form, now just a blur ahead of him. Then, without warning, she stopped. It wasn't an accidental stumble. No, she was waiting for him. As Dorian reached her, he stopped just short, chest heaving from the chase. She stood still, her back to him, her body stiff as a board. The moment Dorian drew close, she spun around, her eyes wide and desperate, as if she was searching for an escape. "I don't know what you're afraid of, but—" Dorian started, but he didn't get the chance to finish. The woman suddenly dropped to her knees, her face a mask of fear. "Please, don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. You're not supposed to be here. You're him. The one who destroyed my people." Her words hit Dorian like a punch to the gut. He stood there, shocked, unable to speak. The woman continued to tremble, her eyes looking everywhere, but at him. You are the reason we hide, the reason we fear. The destroyer." She choked out, each word heavier than the last. Dorian's mind raced, but he couldn't process what she was saying. How could he possibly be the cause of destruction? He was just an explorer, a man who had been living a peaceful life far from any conflicts. Yet her words lingered in the air, suffocating him with their weight. He felt as if something was being pulled out of him, something buried deep within, but he couldn't understand it. Before he could say anything more, the woman's fear seemed to break. She looked up at him with wide, haunted eyes, and in that moment, Dorian realized she wasn't just afraid. She was terrified of him. But why? What did he have to do with any of it? She had called him a destroyer, a name that didn't fit him at all. He was just Dorian Vex, a man from Earth, or so he thought. Dorian knelt down slowly, trying to get a better look at the woman who seemed to be on the verge of breaking down completely. Her hands were pressed against the ground, as if she were trying to steady herself, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. He could see the tears in her eyes, the deep fear that had taken root in her very soul. Something was terribly wrong, but he couldn't understand what. "Hey, it's okay," Dorian said again, this time softer, more reassuring. He didn't know what else to say. His mind was racing. The woman, who had barely said a word in a language he understood, had called him the destroyer, but he didn't feel like a destroyer. He was just a man who had come to explore. I don't know what you think I've done, but I promise, I'm not here to harm you. The woman's eyes flickered to his face, and for a brief moment, Dorian thought she might finally calm down. But then, her gaze turned down to the ground again, and her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she spoke. You don't know what you are, do you? She said. You don't remember. You are the one who destroyed my people. Dorian felt a chill run down his spine. What was she talking about? The words made no sense. He had never been involved in any kind of conflict on this scale. He had seen wars, yes, but never anything that could have led to the destruction of an entire people. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a weapon. He had left that life behind. Or had he? The woman looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something. You were the one they feared, the one who came from the stars. My people called you the Harbinger, the destroyer who wiped us out. Her voice cracked, and she took a shaky step back, as if the very sight of him was too much to bear. Dorian couldn't breathe. No, that can't be right, he said, his voice shaking despite his best effort to stay calm. He stepped back, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. I'm not. There's no way I could have. You are the one they called the Void Reaper, the woman interrupted, her voice now rising with emotion. You were created by your people to be the ultimate weapon. You slaughtered us. And now you're back. Her voice cracked as she said the last part, the fear and sorrow in her eyes palpable. Why are you here? Why are you on this world? Why? Why now? Dorian's mind was in chaos. The Void Reaper. He'd never heard of that name before. He had never even heard of this planet until he picked up the distress signal. But there was something nagging at him, something deep within him, like a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. He wasn't sure what it was, but he had this undeniable feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. The woman's words were too specific, too filled with pain to be just some wild accusation. She knew something about him. Look, I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not the person you're describing, Dorian said, his voice quieter now. He didn't want to be aggressive, but he couldn't keep pretending that none of this was affecting him. There was a pit in his stomach, a gnawing sensation that he couldn't shake. I'm not this Harbinger. I'm just Dorian Vex. I'm just a man from Earth. The woman stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and terror. You really don't remember, do you? She whispered as if she was speaking to herself more than him. The war, the destruction, the burning of our cities. It was you. You are him. She stepped away from him, as if the proximity itself was unbearable. We thought you were gone. We thought the Void Reaper was gone. But you've come back. Dorian's mind spun. The Void Reaper. He had never heard the name before, but something about it felt wrong. It was as if her words were digging up pieces of his past he had never even known existed. Could it be possible? Could his past truly be something he didn't remember? Was it possible that, somewhere deep inside, he was the monster she spoke of? I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice shaking now. I'm not. Whoever you think I am. But I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. I'm just trying to understand. The woman met his gaze once more, her eyes filled with a mix of disbelief, fear, and something else. Perhaps hope. You don't remember, she whispered, as if finally understanding something about him. But you will. Dorian stood motionless, the weight of the woman's words hanging heavily in the air. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he first landed on this unknown planet, but it certainly wasn't this. The woman, Ira, she had called herself, had just told him he was some kind of ancient destroyer, a being from the past who had wiped out her people. But none of it made sense. He couldn't remember anything like that. He couldn't even imagine being capable of such destruction. He wasn't a monster. Zyra's gaze was unwavering, almost as if she was waiting for something to click in Dorian's mind. He felt her eyes on him, searching, desperate for him to understand. She believed what she said. She knew who he was. But Dorian had no memory of anything she described. He was just a man, a human explorer, not some god of war. Yet, as she spoke, a strange unease had crept into his chest, as if there was a part of him that didn't want to believe her, but couldn't entirely dismiss it either. "I don't understand," Dorian muttered, his voice strained. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think through the fog clouding his mind. "I've never been to your planet before. I don't even know who you're talking about. This, Void Reaper, this, Harbinger. It's not me. It's not." Zyra's lips trembled as she took a cautious step toward him, her eyes softening with what seemed like pity. "You don't remember, but I can't change that. I can't erase what your kind did to us. But you should at least know the truth." Dorian's heart skipped a beat. What truth? What was she talking about? His head throbbed, and for a moment, a strange sensation washed over him, like a distant memory, one that he couldn't quite place. He had been a soldier once, a long time ago, when he was part of the United Earth Defense Forces. But even then, he didn't remember anything that would have caused the kind of destruction Zyra was talking about. He had left that life behind. Wasn't that why he became an explorer? "Why are you telling me this?" Dorian asked, his voice shaky, trying to make sense of everything. "Why do you think I'm this? Destroyer? If I really did something terrible to your people, why aren't you just trying to kill me? Why didn't you run away from me completely? You could have just left me here." Zyra's face softened as she took another step toward him, her eyes filled with sadness. "Because even though you don't remember, there's still something inside of you that is the destroyer. Your people tried to bury it, tried to make you forget, but it's still in you." She paused, her voice almost a whisper. "You're not just some explorer. You were created to be a weapon. They called it Project Revenant, a super soldier designed to destroy entire civilizations. And they used you against us." Dorian froze, the words hitting him like a blow to the chest. Project Revenant. He'd heard whispers of such things during his time in the military, but never anything concrete. It was supposed to be a myth, a secret program that never saw the light of day. He had thought it was just a rumor, but Zyra's words made it feel like the past was reaching out to him in ways he couldn't escape. He clenched his fists, feeling a growing sense of panic. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of some weapon." His voice cracked with frustration. "If I really was some kind of monster, how did I end up here? Why don't I remember any of this? Why did I leave that life behind?" Zyra shook her head, her eyes filled with sympathy. "You didn't get a choice. They erased your memory. They made sure you wouldn't remember what you were capable of. They sent you into space, away from everything, hoping you would forget your true purpose. But the past has a way of catching up with you, and now it's here. You're not just a human, Dorian. You're the last remnant of a war that never ended." Dorian felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. The realization hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced. He wasn't just some man from Earth. He wasn't just an explorer. He had been part of a terrifying program designed to bring entire civilizations to their knees. It didn't matter that he didn't remember it. It didn't matter that he didn't want to be that person. Zyra was right. The truth was right in front of him, and it was undeniable. Zyra stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "The galaxy knows you as the Void Reaper, Dorian. And now, they're afraid you've come back to finish what was started. You've only just begun to remember what you were. And when that happens, there's no turning back." Dorian's mind swirled with a mixture of disbelief and panic. The pieces Zyra was laying out were too much to process, too overwhelming to accept. He had always prided himself on his calm, logical thinking, but now, as the weight of her words settled in, that calmness was slipping away. He staggered backward, his eyes wide and searching the surroundings, as if the very ground beneath him might offer some kind of answer. The Void Reaper. He couldn't make sense of it. He had been a soldier, yes, but that was before. Before he had chosen to walk away from a life of violence. Before he had started to explore the stars, hoping to find a purpose that didn't involve destruction. But what if Tyra was right? What if there was a part of him that did remember? A part buried so deep inside that he couldn't see it, couldn't feel it. His head throbbed painfully, the flashes of images he couldn't fully comprehend pushing their way to the surface. He saw flashes of weapons, giant ships that tore through planets, and screams of terror that echoed in his mind. But they were only fragments, quick glimpses of a past he couldn't fully grasp. Zyra was still watching him closely, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and sadness. "You have to understand, Dorian," she said gently, stepping closer. "I'm not here to hurt you. I know you're not the same as you were before, but there are people out there who don't care. They don't care that you don't remember. They will see you as the same weapon they feared all those years ago." She paused, letting her words sink in. The galaxy remembers the Void Reaper, and the galaxy is afraid. Dorian ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "I don't want to be that person. I didn't ask for this. I don't even know how to deal with it. I thought I was just a man who made a choice to walk away from everything." Zyra's expression softened as she stepped even closer, her voice becoming more urgent. "You didn't walk away, Dorian. They sent you away. They thought you were just a weapon that could be discarded, but you're more than that. You have a chance to do something different, to change what you were made for." Dorian's mind was racing. Could he really change who he was? Was it possible to outrun the monster that Zyra insisted he had been? He felt the weight of his past crashing down on him, the burden of what he might have been, or what he might still be. He didn't want to believe that his existence had been reduced to a tool of destruction, but a small part of him couldn't ignore the deep sense of unease that clung to him. Something inside him did know that he was more than just a man, but was that something dark, something dangerous. And if it was, could he ever escape it? "I don't know if I can change," Dorian said quietly, his voice trembling as he fought to keep his composure. "How can I be sure that I'm not just broken like they wanted me to be? How can I trust myself?" Zyra took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving him. "It's not about trusting yourself right now. It's about making the choice every day to not become what they wanted you to be. You're not just a weapon, Dorian. You're more than that. You have the power to choose your own path." Dorian looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so lost, so uncertain about who he was or what he was supposed to be. But as he gazed at Zyra, something in her eyes, the same determination and fear that had been there since their first encounter, made him want to believe her. He wasn't sure how he would ever escape the shadows of his past, but he knew that this moment was a crossroads. This was the first time he had been truly forced to confront what he might have been, and what he would become. "I don't know if I can erase the past," Dorian murmured, still struggling to wrap his mind around everything. "But I won't let it define me. Not anymore." Zyra nodded, her face lighting up with a hint of hope. "That's the first step. You've already started." As the words lingered between them, Dorian's gaze drifted to the sky above them, the strange, swirling colors of the alien atmosphere. It was a world unlike any he had ever known, full of mystery and danger. And yet, in this moment, it felt like the beginning of something new. He didn't know what the future held, or if he would ever escape the legacy of the Void Reaper. But one thing was clear. He had a choice, and he was going to fight for it, whatever it took. Dorian's resolve was slowly solidifying, but the weight of his past still clung to him like a shadow, never fully letting go. He had promised himself that he wouldn't be the monster Zyra believed him to be, but the path forward wasn't as clear as he hoped it would be. As much as he wanted to trust his instincts, something deeper inside him still resisted the idea that he could ever truly escape what he had been created for. How could he be sure? The idea of becoming the person Zyra believed he could be, the man who would stand against the destruction of entire civilizations, felt like an impossible mountain to climb. Still, he couldn't deny that he had to try. Zaira watched him quietly, her face soft with understanding, but also with a hint of caution. She knew that his mind was racing, trying to piece together the fractured memories that seemed just out of reach. "You're not alone in this, Dorian," she said, her voice steady but filled with a sincerity that reached him. "You're not the first to fight against the darkness inside of them. But it starts with facing the truth, no matter how painful." Dorian didn't know how to respond. The truth was that he was terrified. He wasn't afraid of the past. He was afraid of what would happen if he truly embraced it. The more he thought about it, the more his mind churned with unanswered questions. Who had created him? Who had decided that he would become the weapon that wiped out Xera's people? And why had he been sent into space, far from all of it, with no memory, no knowledge of the horror that had once been his purpose? "Why me?" Dorian whispered, almost to himself. "Why was I chosen for this? What did I do to deserve this fate?" Zaira stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't deserve it. No one does. The people who created you, those who saw you as nothing more than a tool, they didn't care about you. They only cared about what you could do for them. But you are more than what they made you to be." Dorian stared at her, his heart hammering in his chest. Her words felt like a lifeline in the storm of confusion that was threatening to pull him under. Could he really believe this? Could he truly leave behind a legacy of destruction that seemed to haunt him in the corners of his mind? He wanted to, more than anything. But the past was a heavy burden, and some nights the doubts would creep in, asking if he could ever be more than the weapon they had forged him to be. "We need to find out the truth," Dorian said finally, his voice steady now, despite the storm raging within him. "I need to understand what happened, what I was made for, and why I can't remember any of it. Maybe if I understand, I can stop it. I can make sure it doesn't happen again." Zaira nodded, a faint but hopeful smile tugging at her lips. "We will," she said. "There are others out there, others who know more about Project Revenant. We can't be sure who to trust, but we'll find the answers. You won't be facing this alone. Not anymore." Her words gave him a small sense of comfort, but he knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger. The people who had created him, who had used him, would not let him walk away so easily. If they still saw him as their weapon, as the Void Reaper, they wouldn't hesitate to come after him. And that meant that he wasn't just fighting for his own redemption. He was fighting for his very survival. "I'll have to go back," Dorian murmured, his thoughts turning to the stars. "I'll need to face the places I've run from. I'll need to confront them head on." Zaira's eyes darkened, but she didn't argue. She understood better than anyone the dangers of confronting the past. Still, she placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in that moment. "It's not just about facing them, Dorian. It's about showing them that you're not what they made you to be. You're not their weapon anymore." Dorian looked at her, feeling a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could change the course of his future. But he also knew that the journey would be long and full of risks. The past wasn't something that could be erased, but it could be rewritten. And he would fight with everything he had to ensure that his past wouldn't define who he was. Together, they stood in the quiet jungle, the sounds of the alien world around them. It was a world filled with mysteries, both beautiful and terrifying. But for Dorian, it was also a place of possibility, a place where the man he would become could be born, free from the shackles of the past. The journey ahead would be hard, but it was a journey he would take, no matter where it led. Dorian's mind was in turmoil as he and Xera prepared to leave the alien planet. The weight of their mission hung heavily between them. They had to find the answers that would explain his past, answers that would tell him who had created him and why. More importantly, they had to find a way to prevent the darkness within him from ever being used again. But as they readied the ship, an uncomfortable reality settled in. They weren't just up against the unknown. They were up against powerful forces that would stop at nothing to reclaim what they had lost. Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the journey would become. His past wasn't just something that could be forgotten. It was alive, lurking in the shadows, waiting to catch up to him. Zira seemed to sense his unease, her calm presence grounding him as they moved through the ship's corridors. She had been his guide through this strange, terrifying new world, but now they were about to enter a far more dangerous one, the one that had made him what he was. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Dorian took a deep breath, looking out the window at the vast expanse of space. Stars twinkled in the distance, each one representing a world he had never seen, a life he could never truly know. His past had always been hidden, locked away from him, but now the universe felt vast and full of uncertainty. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," he said quietly, "but I have to do this. For myself. For you." Zira smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're not alone, Dorian. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side. We're in this together." The reassurance in her words helped, but it didn't quiet the storm inside him. The truth was, Dorian didn't know what he would find. What if the people who had created him still existed? What if they came after him, tried to finish what they had started? What if he couldn't control the power that lay dormant inside of him? The power that Zira feared, the power that had been responsible for so much destruction. It was terrifying to think about. But in that moment, as the ship's engines roared to life, and they made their way into space, something inside him hardened. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for a different future. Hours passed, and the quiet hum of the ship became a familiar sound. The journey was long, and the distance between them, and the answers they sought only made Dorian's sense of urgency grow. Every new star system they passed reminded him of how much there was left to uncover. His mind kept returning to the images that still haunted him, the glimpses of destruction, the feeling that something far darker was buried deep within him. "We're getting closer," Zira said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "The coordinates are pointing to a remote sector in the galaxy. It's a place where the project was said to have begun. The place where they made you." Dorian nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. What would they find there? Would there be survivors, people who knew what had happened? Or would they find only more shadows, more pieces of the puzzle that didn't quite fit together? "What if they're still there?" he asked, his voice strained. "What if they haven't forgotten about me? What if I'm still their weapon?" Zira met his gaze, her eyes steady and full of resolve. "Then we fight. We do whatever it takes to make sure they never use you again." It was the answer Dorian had been hoping for, the one he had needed to hear. But even as he nodded, a part of him wasn't so sure. The power he had inside of him wasn't something easily controlled. He had only just begun to understand the depths of what he was capable of, and the fear that he might lose control was always in the back of his mind. Still, Zira was right. They were in this together, and together they might just have a chance to uncover the truth, and maybe, just maybe, change the course of the future. The journey ahead was unknown, and there were no guarantees, but Dorian had come too far to turn back now. As the ship moved through the stars, he could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, but he was ready to face it. He didn't know what he would find when they reached there. As the ship glided closer to the remote sector of the galaxy, Dorian felt a sense of anticipation building within him. Every passing moment brought him closer to the answers he desperately sought. He could sense the gravity of the situation pressing down on him, and though the fear still gnawed at his insides, there was a spark of determination in him that had been missing for far too long. The possibility of uncovering the truth about his past, about who he really was both a relief and a burden. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that whatever they found, it would change everything. Zira sat beside him in the ship's cockpit, her fingers lightly brushing over the control panel as the navigation system continued to chart their course. She, too, seemed lost in thought, her usually composed expression tinged with uncertainty. Dorian could sense that she was just as anxious as he was, though she kept her emotions well hidden. It was clear that this journey meant more to her than just solving the mystery of his origins. She had a personal stake in this, and Dorian couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her story than she had let on. She had never truly explained why she had decided to help him, why she had chosen to join him on this perilous journey into the unknown. Maybe, he thought, this was as much about her own redemption as it was about his. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Dorian opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. What could he say that would make a difference now? They were so close to the answers they had been seeking, but even then, the fear still clawed at him. What if the truth was something he couldn't bear to face? What if there was no escaping the monster he had once been? Hidera broke the silence, her voice soft but determined. We're almost there. Just a few more minutes, and we'll be in range of the planet. The location we're heading to is a research facility, abandoned years ago. But from what I've gathered, it's where Project Revenant started. If there's anything left of it, it'll be there. Dorian nodded, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as the ship's engines hummed steadily beneath him. The cold, distant stars outside the windows seemed to grow brighter as they neared their destination, each one a reminder of how far they had traveled, how much they had risked. And yet, despite the fear that lurked within him, a part of him felt a strange sense of hope. No matter what they found, he knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, a chance to take control of his own destiny. As the ship entered the planet's atmosphere, the view shifted. The once clear expanse of space gave way to the swirling, thick clouds of the planet below. Thyra maneuvered the ship through the layers of clouds, her focus unwavering. Dorian's heart beat faster as they descended, the landscape slowly revealing itself beneath the haze, a vast, barren wasteland stretching out as far as the eye could see. Jagged mountains jutted from the ground, casting long shadows across the dusty, cracked earth. In the distance, a cluster of ruined buildings loomed, the remnants of a once proud facility that now stood silent and forgotten. "We're here," Thyra said, her voice steady as the ship touched down on the cracked ground with a soft thud. The air outside was thick, and Dorian could smell the dry, metallic scent of old machinery and decay. The world felt ancient, as though it had been abandoned long before they arrived. Yet there was something eerily alive about the place, something waiting to be discovered. Dorian's pulse quickened as he unstrapped himself from his seat and stood up. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was the moment that would shape everything. As he stepped into the airlock and onto the planet's surface, the weight of his past seemed to press down on him from all sides. The memories he had buried for so long were now starting to resurface, flickering at the edges of his mind. He couldn't ignore them any longer. Thahira moved beside him, her expression hardening as she surveyed the desolate landscape. She didn't speak, but the tension between them was palpable. They were both fully aware that what lay ahead was dangerous. The remnants of Project Revenant, the very thing that had created him, were buried in the ruins of this forsaken place. And as they ventured deeper into the heart of the facility, Dorian couldn't help but wonder if they were about to uncover a truth that was far darker than anything he could imagine. With every step, he felt closer to understanding the truth of who he was, and the terrifying possibility that he might never escape the legacy that had been forced upon him. But no matter what he found, he had already made his decision. He would face whatever came next with courage, and he would fight to rewrite his story, no matter the cost. Dorian's heart raced as he and Sarah moved deeper into the ruins of the facility. The air inside was thick with the scent of rust and decay, the walls lined with old, broken technology. As they walked through the narrow hallways, the silence around them was unsettling. It felt as though the place had been abandoned for lifetimes, and yet there was something lurking in the shadows, something that had been waiting for them. Every step Dorian took seemed to echo in the emptiness, the sound bouncing off the cold metal surfaces that once served as the heart of the deadly Project Revenant. The memories that had been buried deep within him were now rising to the surface, flickering like ghosts at the edges of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been here before, that these walls had once been familiar to him in ways he couldn't explain. His mind swirled with a mix of confusion and fear, as though the truth was just out of reach, taunting him. Zaira, ever the steady presence by his side, moved with purpose. Her sharp eyes scanned every corner, every doorway, as if searching for something, someone. Dorian had never known Zaira to show fear, but he could see it now, buried behind her calm exterior. She wasn't just concerned for him. She was concerned for them both. There was something here, something they hadn't anticipated, something that could change everything. They reached a large central chamber, the heart of the facility. The room was dim, but the dim glow of old monitors still flickered along the walls. In the center of the room stood a large console, its screens filled with static and strange symbols. It was clear that no one had used this facility in years, but the equipment here still hummed with energy. It was as if the place was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. Dorian stepped forward, drawn to the console. His hands hovered above the controls, and as he touched the surface, the screens flickered to life. The strange symbols on the monitors shifted, rearranging themselves into something more familiar. A map. A map of the galaxy, with various systems highlighted in red. One system in particular was marked with a bold, blinking icon. Dorian's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the location. It was a place from his past, a place he had never thought he would see again. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is where it all started." Zaira moved closer, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map. "But why here?" she asked. "Why would they mark this place? What's so important about it?" Dorian didn't have an answer. He didn't need to speak. The truth was starting to become clear, but it was more terrifying than anything he had imagined. The system on the map wasn't just a research facility. It was the location of a hidden base. It was where the people who had created him had kept their most dangerous experiments. The place where they had refined him, shaped him into a weapon. And it was where he had lost everything, his memories, his sense of self. "What if we're not the only ones here?" Zaira's voice broke through his thoughts, and Dorian snapped back to the present. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as a chill ran down his spine. She was right. The feeling in the air had changed. The stillness was no longer. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the halls, growing louder by the second. Dorian's pulse quickened as he and Zaira turned to face the direction of the noise. A shadow moved in the doorway, tall and menacing. The figure emerged into the dim light, revealing a person. No, a thing, clad in black armor. Its helmet was featureless, but Dorian could feel its gaze upon him. It was one of them, one of the soldiers created by the same people who had made him. Without warning, the soldier raised its weapon, pointing it directly at them. Dorian's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had feared, the moment when the past would catch up to him. But he wasn't the same person he had been before. He had Zaira by his side, and together they could face whatever came their way. The soldier's voice crackled through the helmet, cold and mechanical. "Dorian, you're coming with us." Zaira stepped in front of him, her expression hardening. "Not this time," she said, her voice low but filled with determination. "We're not your weapons anymore." Dorian's eyes locked onto the soldier's helmet, his heart pounding as the realization hit him. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment when he would finally break free from the chains of his past. He wasn't going to let them control him any longer. With Zaira at his side, he would fight to reclaim his future. The soldier moved forward, but Dorian was ready. He wasn't going to run, not anymore. He stepped toward the soldier, his hands trembling with both fear and excitement. This was his fight, This was his chance to take back control. And he was ready.